أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. The source of all existence in this life is the Almighty God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Therefore, as we continue our journey into Aqa'ed, the Islamic belief system, everything starts with the existence of the Almighty God. For He is our Creator, the Creator of the universe. He is the source of all life and all existence. So, the starting point when it comes to the Islamic belief system is the Almighty God and the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Before we examine some proofs and arguments about the existence of God, it is important to mention a number of points. The first point is that we have a number of narrations and also indications in the Holy Qur'an that the Almighty God has programmed us to believe in Him. One common word that you have heard that describes this is the fitrah. What is the fitrah? The fitrah is basically an innate tendency, a power, an inner voice that points you to the existence of the Creator. That I have a Creator. There is God who created me and I'm in need of that Creator. This is what we call fitrah. Scientifically, it has been proven and a lot of research has been conducted on this fundamental issue. It has been proven that the human being has been programmed to believe in a higher power, in a supernatural being. Biologically, we've been programmed. Evolutionary scientists are actually puzzled when they examine the traits that human beings have, our history in terms of evolution. This aspect of the human being, to believe in a supernatural being, has puzzled them. Because they ask the question, what benefit did it serve? The belief in a God, in a supernatural being, actually was very costly. Because human beings throughout history sacrificed so much, dedicated so many of their efforts to God, to a higher being, to a supernatural power. Why? From an evolutionary perspective, why is it the case that there is this insistence on believing in a higher power? Therefore, scientists are concluding that the human brain is wired to believe in a supernatural being. There's a biological component to believing in God. There's something in our biology, in these physical makeup of our brains, that pushes us to believe in a supernatural being, in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in God. So why is this there? They're really puzzled. When you examine the hadith, it's very clear that the Almighty God did program us to believe in Him. In other words, He's helping us, even through our biology, even through the chemistry of our brain, to believe in Him, to believe in a supernatural power being. This is what we call the fitrah. A number of narrations state that every newborn, every person is born with the fitrah. You have that innate tendency to believe in a higher power, to believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes, there are some aspects of our upbringing, our society, that can block that fitrah, override that fitrah, but the fitrah is there. And hence, historically, you will find that millions of people have believed in God. The question is why? What is this insistence on believing in God? So many prophets and messengers, so many communities, all talking about this higher being, supernatural being that we call God. Why this insistence? Is this some sort of coincidence that people throughout history just suddenly decided to invent this creator, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and just believed in Him and sacrificed for Him and worshipped Him? What's this coincidence? It tells you there's something more to it. There's something biological that's driving you to believe in God. And hence, historically, you'll find that throughout the world, even in isolated regions, in isolated areas, while there was paganism, idolatry, yes, but the belief in this God, this power, always existed. This is a natural reflection of our fitrah. If you examine our society today, here in America, despite all the technological and scientific advancements that we have, and more we're discovering the secrets of the universe and how the universe works, you'd be surprised at how many Americans believe in God. What is the percentage of Americans who believe in God? Can you make a guess here? 89%. 89%. According to Gallup, they do surveys. According to this survey, 89% of Americans, they actually admitted that they do believe in God or a higher being that created us, an intelligent being that created us. They may not necessarily call Him God for a number of reasons, but they believe in the concept of God. 89% of Americans actually believe in that. That's truly amazing. It tells you, look, it's just not a matter of religious scriptures that we have, the Bible, the Qur'an. No, there's more to it than that. Many people are not religious. They don't read the scriptures. Yet, they find this power within them that points them to a higher being, to a creator. And that's truly fascinating when you examine how many people are believing God. Now, yes, we do admit that there is a trend that is growing towards atheism and rejecting God. So decades ago, maybe 94, 96% of Americans believed in God. Now it's around 89%. So the wave of atheism, for a number of reasons, is gradually increasing and growing. Yet you will find that still, most people believe in that higher being. So there's this amazing biological component into believing in that higher power, that higher existence. Now let's talk about some arguments about the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Islamic belief system starts with God. In today's course, we'll examine the existence of God. In the next course, we'll examine Tawheed. Is there one God, or there can be a number of gods? Now you will find that the Qur'an focuses more on Tawheed, the oneness of God, than the existence of God. Why? Because the existence of God is so clear. أَفِي اللَّهِ شَكٌّ. There's a verse in the Qur'an says, is there any doubt about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And remember, the Arabs at the time, most of them, they did believe in God, but they were pagans and idolaters who ascribed idols to God as partners to God. So they did believe in God as the creator, but they simply worshipped other idols as well. So that's why you will find most of the arguments and proofs in the Qur'an, they're talking about shirk or polytheism. Otherwise, the existence of God, it's built in, it's clear. And hence the Qur'an does give us a number of verses about the existence of God, but it talks more about the oneness of God than the actual existence of God, because the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is very clear. Now to mention a few points here. Number one, we don't need to prove the existence of God. Who are we to prove God's existence? I, the weak creation of God, am here to prove the existence of the King of the universe? Who am I to even prove the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So whenever you talk about God, don't think that you're proving God's existence. God always existed. He was never absent. He was never in need for you to come and prove His existence. Hence, Al-Imam Al-Hussein alayhi salam, in Dua Arafah, he has a beautiful statement. He says, مَتَى غِبْتَ عَنَّا لِكَيْ تَحْتَاجَ إِلَى دَلِيلٍ يَدُلُّ عَلَيْكِ. Beautiful. Oh Allah, when were you ever absent for you to need proofs, evidences to prove that you exist? When were you ever absent? And then the Imam alayhi salam says, أَيَكُونُ لِغَيْرِكَ مِنَ الظُّهُورِ مَا لَيْسَ لَكَ. The Imam says the most evident and clear thing in existence is your presence, your existence. How can I use something that is weaker, less evident, these arguments and proofs, to point me to your existence? For instance, if I want to use the galaxy and the stars and the moons and the cosmos, the universe, to say, okay, all this creation proves God exists. In this interesting statement, the Imam says, oh Allah, your existence is more powerful than the sun. How can I use the sun's existence, which is weak, created, in need, to prove your absolute existence? It's a beautiful statement from the Imam. So these are just signs. That's why the Qur'an does not call them proofs for God's existence. God doesn't need any proofs. These are just signs, ayat, that point you to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What's the role of a sign? Just to point, that's it. So we don't need to prove the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah is there, He's evident, and He's the most evident reality. Now, here's the interesting question. You could argue, if God is so evident and clear, why do some people reject Him? If it's as clear as we're saying, why do some people reject the existence of God or have doubts about the existence of God? There are two primary reasons. One is out of arrogance. Some people, especially some atheists, they do not want to be subjected to the laws of God. Because when you admit there is a God, God has laws. And if God has laws, you ought to follow those laws. Some people want to be free. It's that arrogance of, no, I don't want to submit myself to God. Or some, it's because of a tragic incident that happened in their life. They're upset at the will of God. So they become angry. That anger pushes them to reject the existence of God. It's really clear to them. They, inside their mind and heart, the bottom of their heart, they know God exists, but due to arrogance, they will reject God. That's one reason. The second interesting reason, and this is very interesting. When you look at things around you, how do you come to know objects and things? Through their opposites. How do you know light exists? When it's dark, right? Imagine if in our lives there was one shade of light and it's constant. Would you really know what light is when you haven't seen the opposite of light? From the minute you're born till the last day of your life, you see one level of light. It doesn't dim, it doesn't get stronger, it doesn't extinguish, it doesn't get dark. When that happens, can you see the light really sometimes? Or you could have doubts, okay, where is the light when it's all around you? Because you haven't seen the opposite. Once you see darkness, okay, it's a no-brainer. Even a kid understands there's light. The minute light is absent, you're like, okay, now I see that light exists. How do you know what generosity is? Through stinginess. If everyone is generous and they all have the same degree of generosity, you really wouldn't know what generosity is. How do you know what good is when you see evil? If everyone's good, impeccable, perfect, and you have not seen evil in your life, you don't even know what evil is. It's difficult to see the goodness when you're in a constant state of goodness. Now here's the thing. Everything in life has an opposite except Allah. The existence of God has no opposite. We cannot conceive of a creation without God because it's impossible. If theoretically we could see a world, a universe without God, the existence of God would be super clear. But we don't have such a supposition. You can't even suppose a universe, a creation without a creator, because that is illogical. Anything that exists must have a creator, must be created by God. But let's say theoretically, for the sake of argument, we could picture a world in which there was no God. Now that's impossible, but I'm just saying for the sake of argument, if we could picture that, it'd be super clear that there is a God. So some people are confused about the existence of God, or they reject the existence of God. Why? Because there's no opposite to it. It's so clear, it's so evident, it's so, pervasive and continuous and constant. You don't see any other scenario. Therefore, sometimes you just can't see it. لِشِدَّةِ وُضُوحِهِ. Something when it's so clear, sometimes you just can't see it. Just like the example of the light that I gave. We know what light is through darkness. If you were born and you'd constantly see one layer of light, one shade of light. Sometimes, you could be seeing the light, you're like, what is light? I can't see it. Where it is? It's all around you. Where? You haven't seen darkness to compare it. We cannot see the absence of God to compare that absence with the existence of Allah. Hence, some people doubt it. Hence, there are some atheists who reject the existence of God because it is so clear. So this is also an interesting point about the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because many people do say, the Quran says, أَفِي اللَّهِ شَكٌّ? Is there doubt about the existence of God? The reason why there is doubt is because it's so clear and it is so evident. So let us examine some signs here. Let's not call them necessarily arguments or proofs, because Allah does not need any proof. Let's call them signs. Some signs that point us to the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There are many proofs and arguments that you will find in theology, in philosophy. Some of them are shared by religions, by Christianity, by Islam. Some of them are specific to the religion of Islam. There are a number of arguments out there. However, I believe the most comprehensive argument that takes into consideration many aspects from other arguments is what we call the argument of design, or the teleological argument. So we have the argument of design. Another word for it, another term for it, is the teleological argument. There's the ontological argument. There are a number of arguments. This is what we call the teleological argument. Now, before examining this argument in depth, let's just say the basic form of this argument. At a basic level, what does this argument say? The gist of this argument is that when you look around you and you see the impeccable design, the organization, how specific life is, the conditions for life, the intellect, without any doubt, confirms to you that all this creation must have a creator, an intelligent creator, not just any random creator. So when you see the organization in this life, you automatically know that there is an intelligent creator who created life. Life cannot create its own self, so it must have a creator. Now, in order for us to examine this argument in more depth, let's mention several logical and philosophical points here. One is that we have the law of cause and effect. In Arabic, in philosophy, we call this al-'illa wal-ma'lul. The illa means the cause. Wal-ma'lul means the effect. Everything in this world around us has a cause. There is nothing that can exist without a cause. This is an intellectual law that our power of reason dictates to us. There is a cause to every single effect. Now, when you examine the world around you, the existence around you, the mind tells you everything needs to have a cause. Now, the intellect points to you that everything has a cause. The universe is based on this principle of al-illa, of a cause. Now, all of these effects in the world, they need to go back to one cause that created everything, that caused everything, or put everything in motion. Because when you examine anything that is created in this world, any object, it must have a cause. It cannot exist on its own. Nothing can create itself. In one hadith, Al-Imam Al-Rida alayhi salam points to this law. He was asked, how do you know that you have a creator? He said it very simply. He said, because I did not exist, that I know for sure. There was a point where I did not exist, then I existed. I know I didn't create myself, and I know someone weak like me didn't create me. So I know that I have a creator, that's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He is the first cause. So you have to end at a first cause. Why? You could argue, okay, anything that was created, you can go back in time and say there was something else before it that created it. These galaxies and stars, what created them? There was an event that created them. You go back in time. You go back to the Big Bang. You go back to that first dense core. In the end, you need a first cause that put everything in motion. Because nothing can create its own self. Nothing can move its own self. Now, some will tell you, well, you don't have to arrive at that first cause. It was just there. This kept happening, this cycle. Every effect has a cause. That cause has another cause, and you just go back in time, infinitely. The mind tells you this is impossible. In Arabic, we call this at-tasalsul. What does at-tasalsul mean? When something goes back into existence ad infinitum is what we call it in philosophy. When something keeps going back in time, infinitely, it's impossible. You need a starting point. Because if you don't have a starting point, you have nothing. You can't just infinitely go back. You know, if someone would tell you 13 billion years ago, what caused the universe? Okay, the Big Bang. What caused the Big Bang? A reaction in that dense core. Okay, what caused that reaction? They'll come up with a law in physics that tell you you get that reaction. Okay, what caused that law? What put that law into motion? You need to end somewhere. That's what the mind dictates. You can't infinitely go back, because if you infinitely go back, then you have no effect. But we see that there is an effect. There is this creation. Let me give you a simple example. Let's say you go to a judge and you have a paper that is signed. You go to the judge, you ask him, who signed this paper? He tells you the previous judge, not me. You go to the previous judge, you ask him, who signed this paper? He says, the previous judge who was here before me. You go to that judge and you ask him, who signed this paper? He says, the previous judge. The fifth previous judge, the sixth, seven, eight, and you keep going back into infinity. There must be a first judge who signed this. Because if you infinitely go back and every single judge will tell you the previous judge signed this, and this infinitely goes back, then the mind tells you that's impossible. This infinite regressive chain that we call tasalsul is just impossible. Because when something infinitely goes back, then it doesn't exist. But I see the paper, so there must be a first judge who signed this. When I see the signature, that's an effect. That signature tells me someone must have signed it. It couldn't infinitely go back in time. So we know that tasalsul, this infinite chain that takes you back in time, is impossible. There must be a first cause. There must be a first mover. Now you, sometimes in philosophy, will come across this argument called the argument of motion. We see things around us, they're moving. Particles, every particle, every atom is moving. Every electron is moving. Who put that in motion? There must be a first cause, a first mover as they call that source, who put everything in motion. Otherwise, you have no motion. If you infinitely just keep going back in time, then the mind tells you then there can't be any motion. There must be a starting point. You can't just infinitely go back and say, oh, that previous factor caused the motion. Okay, what caused that factor? Oh, another previous factor, and another one, and you infinitely go back. That's impossible. There must be a first factor that put everything in motion. You know, they say once they asked an old woman who was not educated formally, but she had the ma'rifah of Allah, the knowledge of God. They told this old lady, how do you know that your Lord exists? Now she would sew clothes, and she had, you know, that spinning wheel. She says, my wheel tells me God exists. They're like, how? She's like, when I move it, it moves. And when I stop, it stops. In other words, everything needs a cause. That wheel, it's not going to spin on itself. If I move it, it moves. If I don't, it'll stop. It can't move itself. It needs an outside factor to move it. So even that first core from which the Big Bang occurred, it needs an outside, external power that put it in motion, that gave it its energy. So this argument of design, one of the introductory points that we discuss in terms of this argument is that everything requires a mover. Everything requires a first cause that puts everything into motion. Nothing can create its own self. So this is one of the premises that we use when we examine the argument of motion. Now let's look at the argument of design and see how does this point us to the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When it comes to the argument of design, there are several versions of this argument. One very powerful version is called Hisab al-Ihtimalat. In English, the law of probability, the law of chance. The law of probability, the law of chance demonstrates to us without a doubt that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists. That first creator exists. An intelligent creator must have existed who created this universe. How do we examine this law of probability? When you examine life, you see millions, if not billions, if not trillions of factors at play. Everything. Look at life on earth. Just look at our atmosphere. Our atmosphere is about 500 miles in its height, in its width. It extends 500 miles into the sky. When you look at this atmosphere and you see the purpose of this atmosphere, how it shields the earth from harmful agents, from the radiation of the sun, harmful rays, and you see how precise and delicate that is. It protects us from meteor. And when you look at the composition of this air, for example, you see that the composition in our air is 78% nitrogen, 28 21% oxygen, and then you have some other gases. Why is it that you have this specific composition? Why not more? Why not less? By the way, some people think that you've got more oxygen, right? We think that our atmosphere is filled with oxygen than other gases. No, there's more nitrogen than there is oxygen. And our body can only take oxygen. You know, sometimes nitrogen, usually it finds its way into our bloodstream, but we can't absorb it. Our cells can't use nitrogen. Now, if you had more oxygen, if you had oxygen at 50%, what would happen? It would be very toxic. Number two, everything would be flammable, right? If you ignite one match, light up one match, you get fire everywhere. If one piece of wood would burn, it would burn everything around it. It would be highly combustible. Now, if you had only 10% oxygen, most beings could not survive, they would die. They would suffocate and die. So this delicate balance, 21% oxygen, 78% nitrogen. Did this happen by chance? These are factors that we examine. Just a question. Now, when you examine every aspect of life, you see that the formula, the equation for it is perfect. It's perfect for life. It's perfect for a stable system. How gravity works, how the earth orbits around the sun, the distance between the earth and the sun. Had the sun been any closer, what would have happened? Had the sun been any farther, what would have happened? Now, all of this, the law of probability says, is it by chance? All these factors, are they by chance? Now let's go to the Big Bang and that first core, that dense core, to see how this law of probability plays out. So when we examine the Big Bang, it wasn't really an explosion, it was more of a rapid expansion. So you had this very hot core in the beginning. This core, you know, we don't know exactly the temperature of it, but it was in the trillions and trillions and trillions of degrees. That's how hot it was. Now suddenly, this core begins to rapidly expand. Do you know the rate of expansion that happened? Let's borrow a quote from Stephen Hawking, you know, who was a leading atheist in the world. Let me share with you his quote. He says, if the rate of expansion 1 second after the Big Bang had been smaller by even 1 part in 100,000 million, we'll examine how small that is, the universe would have recollapsed before it reached its present size. If that rate, that amazing rate of expansion, that rate of expansion was faster than the speed of light. Space, that core, you know, which had space, started to expand faster than the speed of light. It doubled in size 90 times in such a fast portion of time. This rate of expansion, if it was a little bit smaller, just a tiny fraction smaller, the universe would have recollapsed. It couldn't reach its present size. On the other hand, he says, if it had been greater by a part in a million, if it was just a little bit faster, the universe would have expanded too rapidly for stars and planets to form. Do you know how this number that he gives us, if the universe was expanding at a rate that is smaller than 1 part in 100,000 million. Do you know how small this number is? Roger Penrose, who's an Oxford professor of math and physics, he gives us an example of how small this is. He says, if I give you a pin, I give you a dart, and you have a target, you're asked to take this dart and throw it at the target. Let's say that board, that canvas, that target board is the universe, is as big as the universe. And you take this dart and you're blindly shooting it. Now, every point on that canvas, which is as big as the universe, your dart, every point that it lands on would create a different universe or no universe at all. Most of the dots, if the pin would land at it, it could not create or generate a universe. Now, what are the chances of that dart, of that pin landing on a point that will create this universe that we have? The characteristics of this universe. How small is that chance? You know what he says? He says if every particle in the universe would be a zero, you would put a zero next to that particle. We human beings, how many atoms do we have? Just one single person on average, how many atoms do you have? 7 trillion atoms. 7 trillion, just one body. Imagine how many atoms and subatomic particles, right? And electrons and protons and neutrons there are in the universe. He says this number, this chance is so small because how do you write a number? If you want to write 1%, how would you write that number? You would write 0.01. That's 1%, right? He's trying to give us an example of how small this chance is that the universe just randomly landed where it is. Let's take this one. He says if next to every particle in the universe you put a zero and you keep going and going and going, if you used every particle in the universe to put more zeros, you still couldn't capture how small this number is. It's so small, and I'll write it to you, it's 1 to the power of 10 to the power of 10 to the power of 123. 1 in that number. That's how small the chance is that this universe just randomly expanded the way it did. Do you see how small this number is? Now here's the point in the law of probability. When the Big Bang happened, when that expansion happened, one of the first elements to be created were hydrogen, helium, and some other gases. Now the question is why? Helium and hydrogen, there were specific amounts in them. Had you changed those amounts by a bit, the universe couldn't exist. Why? Why did you get that specific number of hydrogen, of helium, of these other gases? Why? Why did the universe expand at that specific rate? Why? Each of these are factors. Now when you keep adding these factors one after the other, and then you examine the history of the universe, and then how Earth was formed, and how life was formed, the intellect tells you, look, even if you can argue it's not impossible, right? But this chance is so small, it's negligible. You can't even write it. No book, no board, no hard disk in the world can capture so many zeros. That's how small it is. With every factor, this exponentially grows. Let me give an example. If you have a coin and you flip it, what are the chances that this coin will turn out to be heads? 50, right? 1 out of 2. It's a 50-50. Now, if I flip it the second time, what are the chances of this coin turning out to be heads the second time?
25%.
It's 1 in 4, 25%. Now if I flip it for a third time, what are the chances?
0.125.
0.125. You see how it decreases? Now what if I flip this coin 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times, 1,000,000,000 times? Do you see how small that chance becomes? The factors that were involved in creating this universe are in the trillions and trillions of factors. And each factor that comes at play and interacts with another factor, that number just gets smaller and smaller and smaller. How can you accept that happened by chance without a being that was guiding this process? It's impossible. Now some atheists will come back and tell you, wait a minute. We obviously admit that this number is small. I mean, Stephen Hawking, he tells us about these numbers. He knows it's small. They'll tell you, we know it's very small. We're not arguing with you about that. But it's still possible. If you give it enough time in history of the universe, it could happen. With billions and trillions of years, it could be possible. And they'll give you the example of a lottery. What are the chances of you winning the lottery, right? But hey, it's happening. Every once in a while, somebody wins the lottery. Now, they like to use this example. Now, there are several observations here. First of all, when you look at a lottery, yes, the chances are small. That's true. However, the lottery has a system. Can you have lottery that exists randomly? There are intelligent beings who gave this lottery a system, a mechanism. All you're doing is you're drawing from that lottery. That works fine. Even if the chances are small, you will end up winning with so many people buying those tickets. But who put that system for the lottery? The human being. So a lottery, even though it works by chance, you winning is by chance, but that is based on a system. It can't exist on its own just like that. You can't sit in your house and suddenly win the lottery without going and buying the ticket. And there are people who designed the lottery. Atheists fall into this trap. They tell you this is by chance. Okay, look, maybe you will look at some factors and how they interacted, and you could say it happened by chance. Who put that system on which this law of probability works? It needs a system. An intelligent designer who designs a system. In that system, you can have chance. But the system itself coming into existence, that's impossible for it to just pop into existence by chance. Because chance itself needs a system. And they fail to understand that. They fail to realize that. So this is wrong to think that, okay, this is like a lottery. I know it's small, but it could happen. It cannot. It cannot. The universe could not have created itself, put itself into motion. It needed an external factor. Even if you consider that first hot core to be, the value of 0, which defines everything in physics, it needs an external factor to put it in motion. It can't put itself into motion. It's just impossible. Now here's the important point. Let's say there is 1% chance that the universe came into existence randomly, by chance, without an intelligent creator. Now that's impossible. And we saw the number is way small, right? It's 0.000, and just keep going with trillions of zeros, you still won't get there. The chance is very small for the universe to have just popped into existence like that, randomly, without an intelligent creator. But let's say, for the sake of argument, it's a 1% chance. It's much smaller. It's much smaller. It's not even possible, but let's say it's possible, and it's only 1%. There is 1% chance that the universe randomly came into existence without an intelligent creator. Whenever you have 1% on this side, what do you have on the other side? 99%. Because there's two alternatives, there's two scenarios, there's not a third. Either the universe just randomly, without an intelligent creator, came into existence, or there was a creator who created it. Is there another third possibility? If you know of a third possibility, tell me. What's a third possibility?
This is all a dream.
Either it had a creator, or it did not, and it randomly happened. Is there a third scenario you can think of? No, there's either of these two. Let's say, for the sake of argument, it's 1%, which is not. It's 0, first of all. And secondly, according to these scientists who are atheists, it's much smaller than 1%. It's 0.00, and put a trillion zeros, 1. And that would be 99.999, put a billion nines, right? But let's simplify it. 1 versus 99. Do you know why the Qur'an and the religion of Islam considers an atheist to be the peak of irresponsibility? And that's why the Qur'an is aggressive with those who deny the existence of God. Allah rebukes them in a harsh tone. Because God has given you the intellect, the power of reason. God is telling you, look, okay, fine. Let's say it's 1 versus 99. You took the 1% and you abandoned the 99%. That is the peak of stupidity. When someone takes a number this small and he's rejecting that other number. Because look, the atheist will not tell you it's impossible for God to exist. Most of them say there's just no proof. So it's not an impossibility. There's 2 scenarios. Either God, an intelligent creator, created the universe, or it happened randomly. There is no third. For it to have happened randomly, it's very small. And they admit to that. So why do you take this 1% and you leave that 99%? You know, let me give you another example. Let's say there's a plane and you want to take this flight. You are told that if you get on this plane, the chances of this plane falling is 99.999%. Right? 99.9999% this plane would fall. Which intellectual, sane person will take that chance? The atheists are doing it every day. They're taking this small number and they're abandoning that number. That's the peak of irresponsibility. And that's the problem. Why do you leave the 99% and stick to that small number? Even if we assume this is possible, if we assume, just for the sake of argument, why do you abandon that? That's why the person who rejects the existence of God is making a joke out of his intellect. And God, the best treasure He gave you is the intellect. And when you abuse the intellect like that, do you have honor in the eyes of God? No. That's why God, He can choose to forgive whomever He wants. But there's a punishment for these people who knowingly reject the existence of God. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they have no status with God, no reward from God. Don't expect a reward from God when you come and defy His existence, when it's the clearest reality in life. And you're taking this small percentage here and you're rejecting that percentage. So this is the argument of design based on the argument of probability. The law of probability tells you there's so many factors in the universe, it's impossible for them to just have randomly collaborated and gathered together to give you this amazing, perfect system. Now you'll find, without going, too much into this, because we could take many courses just examining this point, but this is beyond the scope of this course. Some atheists today will come and tell you, well, not everything is perfectly organized. You have dark matter, you have black holes, and they're disorganized. That's a fallacy. Until today, we don't know what the black holes are, why they operate the way they do, what are their characteristics, what are their features. We don't know. They're still a mystery. So we don't know what they are, what their purpose is, for us to come and say, oh, that's a disorganized system. It's not. We don't know much about them. Science, with all of its advancements, black holes are still a mystery. How dark matter operates is still a mystery. So you can't say, oh, there's a lot of disorganization in the universe. As far as we can see, as far as we can perceive and analyze, everything is beautifully orchestrated in the universe. Everything is based on a delicate system. Every single atom and how it operates is based on a delicate system. All of these factors point us to the existence of an intelligent creator. So the believer is the one who will take this, the 99.99. It's 100, but let's say it's 99.9. Why take that? That's very irresponsible. It's like a person who will go on that plane. He says, hey, I know it's 99, but there's 1% chance that it will not fall. Who does that? Which sane person does that? Now this argument of design, do we find it in the Qur'an and the Ahadith? Yes. We'll end with one verse in the Qur'an and also one hadith from Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. In Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 164, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states, إِنَّ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ, the creation of the skies. Just when you look at the galaxies, the solar system, the law of gravity, how everything is just perfectly organized. وَالْأَرْض, when you look at the earth, how it carries life. Just, it's so perfect. The temperature, the gases, the plants, how the sun interacts, is just perfect. Then the Qur'an says, وَاخْتِلَافِ اللَّيْلِ وَالنَّهَارِ, the alternation between the day and the night. How it's so smooth and beautiful. You know, the transition, the Qur'an in Surah Al-Furqan in another verse says, just see how God designed the world in such a way that you get this smooth transition between the day and the night. The Qur'an says, imagine if at 6 a.m. suddenly the sun comes out and it's bright. What would happen? What would happen? Imagine it's dark and suddenly you see there's sun everywhere. You couldn't handle it. It will drive you crazy. It will make you mentally ill if you had to go through that every day. Imagine the animals. You know, it's pitch dark, suddenly it's bright. What would happen? The Qur'an says, look at the alternation between day and night. And even that points you to the spherical nature of the earth. And then the Holy Qur'an says, وَالْفُلْكِ الَّتِي تَجْرِي فِي الْبَحْرِ بِمَا يَنْفَعُ النَّاسِ. Look at the ship that sails in the ocean. How it's for your benefit, it carries the goods. Is that random? This huge ship, which could carry thousands of tons of weight, the water carries it through the law of density. But one small nail you put in the ocean, it sinks to the ground. Who put that law? How does this happen? Is this a coincidence? And then the Qur'an continues and says, وَمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ مِنَ السَّمَاءِ مِنْ مَاءٍ. You look at the rain, how beautifully it comes down, small drops. Imagine if all that water comes down at once, what would happen? Like some floods that we have. And these floods, by the way, they're not a lack of organization or an imperfection. There's a reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has allowed for these systems, such as an earthquake or natural disasters. But just look at the system of how water evaporates, these small drops come down to earth. They're so harmless. It's beautiful how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala delivers water everywhere. And then the Holy Qur'an talks about how the earth comes back to life because of the rain. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this verse talks about the animals, the types of animals, how amazing they are, how beneficial they are to the human being. Then the winds, the changing winds and the role of winds, how amazing that is in sustaining life. At the end, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لَآيَاتٍ لِقَوْمٍ يَعْقِلُونَ. These are all signs for those, not who have a high IQ. No. You could have high IQ, yet you could deviate. For those who use the aql, the intellect that God has given them, that power, that vision, to point you to your Creator. And that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This argument of design, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says it in a very brief, simple way in the Qur'an. And we'll end with this hadith from Imam Al-Sadiq alayhi salam. Abu Shakir al-Daysani was a zindiq. Zindiq meant he was an atheist who rejected the existence of God. He had a number of arguments with the Imam. One day he tells Imam Al-Sadiq alayhi salam, tell me about the existence of God. Show me, where is God? Point me to God. Dullani ala ma'budi. There was a little boy who was playing with an egg. The Imam alayhi salam told the boy, give me the egg. The Imam took the egg in his hand. He told him, oh Daysani, let me ask you this question. You see this egg? It's a fort that has no door to it, it's closed. On the outside you see a hard shell, a hard skin. Beneath this hard skin you see a softer one, right? That membrane. And then inside of it you have two liquids. One is golden, one is like a silver, it's white. Two liquids. Neither does the golden one mix with the silver one. Neither does the silver one mix with the golden one. It's such a simple object. No one enters it to tell us about it, whether this egg is in good shape or bad shape. And nothing comes from inside it to inform us, what's inside of me? Is this a female? Is it a male? What is it? And then you see a colorful, amazing animal like the peacock emerge from this egg with all these colors. Who is the one who made this, who manufactured this? Don't you think it has a creator and a manufacturer? Now the Imam uses amazing Arabic words in describing this. I summarized it. He was so shocked, Abu Shakir al-Daysani, such that when the Imam described this to him, he said at the end, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. I bear witness that there is no God but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we've talked about the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we mentioned in the beginning, it's so clear, yet why do some reject it? In our next course, we will examine the Tawheed, the belief in the oneness of God. Why is there one God only? وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطاهرين.